The silence weighed heavily, filling every corner of the apartment with an emptiness that seemed to seep into the walls. Anna stood in the dimly lit living room, the only light coming from a small lamp casting a pale glow across the space. A suitcase lay open on the floor, half packed, but the thought of leaving felt heavier than anything she could fit inside. Their home, once filled with laughter, arguments, and life, now felt like an empty shell, haunted by memories of what they used to be. She could still hear their last conversation echoing in her mind. It had been a few days, but every word, every strained look stayed with her as if it had just happened. They had sat across from each other at the kitchen table, eyes downcast, both too tired to look the other in the eye. "So, you really think this is what we need?" Anna had whispered, her voice barely above a murmur. Mark let out a long sigh, his fingers tapping absently on the side of his coffee cup, as if searching for the right words, words he wasn't even sure of himself. "I don't know what else to do, Anna. We're stuck in this cycle. Maybe we need time apart to figure out if there's anything left worth saving." She looked up, meeting his eyes, searching for any hint of feeling, of hesitation. Instead, she saw only exhaustion, perhaps a touch of sadness. "And if we figure out there's nothing left?" Her voice trembled, the weight of the question hanging between them. He looked down, gripping his cup, his shoulders sagging. "Then at least we'll know. Staying like this, it's tearing us apart." A painful silence had settled between them, one heavier than any fight they'd ever had. She could still feel it lingering, pressing down on her as she closed the door behind her, the suitcase rolling softly along the hallway floor. Alone in the quiet, she felt a hollow ache begin to form, one that gnawed at her with each step she took away from their life together. In the days that followed, Anna buried herself in work, trying to fill every waking moment with something, anything, to keep herself from listening to the silence that had taken over her life. But the nights were different. At night, there was no escaping it. She lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling, listening to every creak in the apartment, every whisper of the wind outside. In the dark, the silence felt heavier, almost as if someone were there with her, watching her. Sometimes she brushed it off as her imagination, a trick her mind was playing to make up for the emptiness that had settled in. But there was a strange edge to the quiet, something that made her feel observed, as if she weren't as alone as she thought. Finally, desperate for some sort of comfort, she called her best friend, Julia. "Hey, how are you holding up?" Julia's voice was warm, comforting, a reminder of the normalcy she craved. Anna paused, her voice unsteady. "We haven't talked since the separation. We agreed on space, but I didn't think it would feel like this." Her voice cracked. "It's like he's just been erased from my life, and I don't know if I miss him or if I just hate the silence." Julia was quiet for a moment before responding, her voice soft but firm. "Maybe that's what this time is for, to figure out if you really miss him, or if you just miss what you had. But Anna, do you think there's still hope?" Anna's gaze drifted to the window, where the city lights blurred through the evening fog. A strange, unsettling feeling stirred in her. "I don't know, Julia. I'm scared to hope. And I'm almost relieved. Isn't that awful?" Julia's laugh was gentle, knowing. "Maybe it's not awful, Anna. Maybe it's just honest." After ending the call, Anna was left alone with her thoughts, feeling the silence wrap around her like a shroud. She lay in bed that night, unable to sleep, each sound in the apartment sharp and unfamiliar. It was as if the silence itself was hiding something, a presence she couldn't see but could feel lurking just beneath the surface. The days began to blend together, each one heavy with a strange sense of unreality. Anna buried herself in work, filling her schedule so completely that she barely had time to think, let alone feel. Yet, in the quiet of her apartment, when she was finally alone, a creeping unease settled over her. The air felt thick, weighted, and it wasn't long before she began to notice subtle, inexplicable things around her, small signs that someone or something had been there in her absence. It started with little things. Her favorite pen moved from her desk to the nightstand without reason. A half-opened book she'd left on the couch was now closed and back on the shelf. She brushed these off as distractions, slips of memory. Yet, deep down, Anna felt uncomfortable awareness that she wasn't as alone as she should be. One evening, after an exhausting day at work, she dropped her bag by the door and kicked off her shoes. The apartment was dark, Quiet. Too quiet. She flipped on the lights and froze, her heart pounding. On her kitchen table lay an old folded letter, one she thought she'd thrown away long ago, a letter from a period in her life she'd tried hard to forget. Hands shaking, Anna opened it. The words were familiar, yet strange, almost as if someone had rewritten her memories. As she sat there, memories rushed back of a time she'd rather leave buried. This letter had been written to her by someone who knew her better than she'd wanted to admit, someone from a distant past that she thought Mark knew nothing about. She closed her eyes, recalling the way she and Mark had once discussed their pasts with such casual openness. Mark's voice rang clear in her memory. "Mark, I don't care about your past, Anna. We've all got one. Whatever happened back then, it's not who you are now. Maybe. But sometimes I feel like the past doesn't really go away. It just waits." Mark had smiled then, pulling her close. "Well, if it's waiting, we'll face it together." But now, here she was, alone, staring at a reminder of secrets she had long since buried. Was it possible that Mark had somehow dug up this part of her life? She shook her head, rejecting the thought. No, that wasn't him. He'd never been the type to hold the past over her or play mind games. This wasn't his doing. At least, she hoped it wasn't. She tucked the letter back into a drawer, telling herself she'd imagined it. Maybe it had always been there. Maybe she'd just forgotten. But as the days wore on, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. At first, she tried ignoring it, rationalizing every strange occurrence, but it was becoming harder to shake off. One late evening, Anna found herself dialing Mark's number, needing some kind of reassurance, even if she didn't know what she was going to say. To her surprise, he picked up almost immediately. "Mark. Anna?" His voice was hesitant, as if he'd been caught off guard. "Yeah, it's me. Look, I'm not sure why I called. Something strange is going on." "What do you mean?" His tone shifted, a familiar protectiveness edging into his voice. "What's going on?" "I don't know. It's probably nothing. It's just things are out of place. Things I thought I'd gotten rid of have reappeared. I feel like I'm being watched." Her words came out in a rush, her voice barely a whisper by the end. "Anna, do you think I would do something like that?" His voice was pained, and she could hear the disbelief in his words. No, I didn't mean that. It's just, I don't know who else it could be." Silence settled between them, thick and uncertain, as if the words they were searching for remained just out of reach. "Maybe it's just in your head, Anna. You've been through a lot. We both have." His words felt distant, yet she could sense his unease. "Yeah, maybe you're right." But even as she said it, Anna knew it was more than just her mind playing tricks on her. That night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, every shadow in her room casting strange shapes across the walls. Somewhere deep within, she felt a quiet but unsettling certainty that someone else knew her secrets. The idea of being observed, of someone understanding her fears so intimately, haunted her thoughts. As she drifted off to sleep, Anna wondered if the separation, the quiet distance, had somehow let something darker into her life. Something that was now feeding on her fears, twisting her memories, and slipping into her mind like a shadow that never quite disappeared with the light. The feeling of unease had taken root. Each day brought new shadows, a strange presence lurking just out of sight. Anna's thoughts circled back to Mark more and more. She couldn't shake the idea that he might somehow be responsible, that maybe their separation had led him to spy on her, to manipulate her fears. The idea felt absurd, but she clung to it. It was easier than believing she was losing her mind. At night, alone in her apartment, her thoughts spiraled. Why had they even separated? Had he wanted this distance to hide something from her? Her mind began connecting dots that had once seemed insignificant. Missed calls, the way he sometimes acted distracted, how often he would glance at his phone. She found herself scrutinizing everything in her memory, searching for proof of betrayal. One evening, unable to contain herself any longer, Anna called Mark, her hand shaking as she held the phone to her ear. He answered, sounding caught off guard. "Anna? Everything okay?" With barely concealed irritation. "Okay?" "No, not really. I've been thinking, Mark, and I have to ask, what are you hiding?" "What am I hiding? Anna, what are you talking about?" Her voice tightens, frustration bubbling over. "Don't play dumb, Mark. Things have been moved in my apartment. Old letters have reappeared. It's like someone's trying to mess with my head, and the only person who'd know about these things is you." A moment of silence, then a deep sigh. "Anna, I have no idea what's going on in your apartment. You think I would spy on you? Manipulate you? I don't know what to think anymore." Her voice softens, uncertainty creeping in. "But who else would want to make me feel this way? Sounding hurt, but controlled. Listen, I haven't done anything. Maybe this separation is just affecting you more than you thought." Anna ended the call with no sense of relief. If anything, her suspicions had only intensified. Mark's words felt evasive, his reassurance empty. The things happening in her apartment were real, too real to be a figment of her imagination, and he was the only one who could know enough about her past to stage something so unsettling. The next day, unable to keep her fears bottled up, Anna invited her friend Julia over. She needed someone to see the strange changes in her apartment, to validate that it wasn't just in her head. They sat in the living room, Julia observing the subtle but unsettling atmosphere that had settled in Anna's apartment. "I have to admit, Anna, this doesn't feel like your place anymore. You're saying things keep moving? Yes, and not just random things. Specific ones, old letters, pictures, personal items I haven't touched in years. And the timing, it's like someone knows exactly what I'd be vulnerable to." Julia looked at her with concern, processing what Anna was saying. "Do you think it's Mark? That maybe he's trying to manipulate you somehow?" Hesitates, feeling a pang of guilt for suspecting him. "I don't know. I want to believe he wouldn't, but he's the only one who knows all this about me. And after everything, I'm not sure I know who he really is anymore." As Julia left that evening, Anna felt a brief sense of comfort, but it was short-lived. The weight of her suspicions gnawed at her, each small incident now fueling the fire of doubt. Her thoughts became consumed by the idea that Mark was somehow responsible, even as part of her resisted the idea. Yet, the facts pointed in his direction, and she felt her trust slipping away, piece by piece. One evening, as she absent-mindedly looked through her things, she found something unexpected. A note, scribbled in familiar handwriting but unsigned, tucked inside one of her favorite books. It read, "Secrets never really disappear." A chill ran down her spine. She recognized the handwriting immediately. It looked exactly like Mark's. But the more she stared, the more she questioned herself. Could it be his? Or was her mind playing tricks on her? Anna began to realize that whoever was behind this, they knew more than just her history with Mark. They understood her weaknesses, her fears. She felt exposed, as though someone were peeling back layers of her life, exposing her vulnerabilities one by one. The constant feeling of being watched became almost unbearable. Anna's apartment felt like a stranger's home, filled with unseen eyes and whispered secrets. She went through each day on edge, her nerves frayed, as though any moment something would finally reveal itself. The more she thought about the strange occurrences, the more she felt that whoever was behind them was not just trying to unsettle her. They were pushing her. One rainy evening, Anna decided she couldn't stay in the apartment any longer. She needed fresh air, a change of scenery, anything to clear her mind. She pulled on a coat and left, letting the heavy drizzle soak her as she walked aimlessly through the empty streets. She felt an odd sense of relief with each step away from her apartment, as though the act of leaving might free her from the tension that had taken root there. She stopped by a small coffee shop she hadn't visited in years. The place was nearly empty, dimly lit, with a warm, comforting air that felt like a temporary escape. She ordered a coffee and sat by the window, watching the rain fall outside, finally feeling a moment's peace. As she sat, savoring the quiet, she felt a presence nearby. Turning slightly, she noticed a man at a nearby table, his face partially obscured by the shadow. Something about him felt familiar, though she couldn't place why. His gaze was directed at her, but when she met his eyes, he quickly looked away, a faint smile touching his lips. She tried to ignore him, but a gnawing sense of recognition kept her on edge. She looked down, hoping he wouldn't notice her discomfort, but the urge to glance his way again was overpowering. When she finally gave in, he was gone. Just a faint trace of coffee steam lingered where he'd been sitting, as if he'd never been there at all. Uneasy, Anna left the coffee shop, her mind racing. The man's face lingered in her thoughts, and she wondered if he had something to do with the recent events. Had he been following her? Was he the one playing these cruel games, revealing pieces of her past in such twisted ways? Her pulse quickened, and the strange, ominous feeling returned, stronger than before. Back at her apartment, Anna felt compelled to call Julia. She needed to tell someone about the encounter, to piece together the strange familiarity she felt with the man. When Julia picked up, Anna's voice was breathless, words spilling out in a rush. Julia, I think I saw him. The person who's been doing all this. What? Where? Who did you see? I don't know his name, but I recognized him. I'm sure he's the one behind all of it. He was watching me, Julia, sitting just a few tables away, and then he disappeared the second I noticed him. Anna, are you sure? Could it have been someone you know from somewhere else? No, or maybe, I don't know, Julia. It's like I knew his face, but not why, and there was something in his expression, like he knew everything about me, things I'd never told anyone. Her voice wavers, her frustration and fear bubbling over. I can't explain it. It's as if he's been following me, as if he's watching everything I do. After the call, Anna paced her apartment, her mind racing. The pieces weren't coming together, yet she was certain this man had something to do with the strange events. She found herself obsessing over his face, replaying his brief smile, the strange way he'd looked at her as if he held her secrets in his hands. That night, unable to sleep, Anna lay awake, watching the shadows dance on her bedroom wall. The quiet of the apartment felt too thick, too heavy, as if it were hiding something. She closed her eyes, trying to relax when she heard it, a faint rustling just outside her door. Her heart pounded. She lay still, barely breathing, waiting for the noise to stop. But it didn't. It continued, soft and deliberate, as though someone were brushing their fingers along the walls, inching closer and closer. She forced herself to move, slipping quietly out of bed and tiptoeing toward the door. Pressing her ear against it, she held her breath, her hand trembling on the doorknob. For a moment, there was silence. And then, barely audible, came a voice, low and familiar. Secrets never really disappear. Her blood ran cold. It was the same line from the note she'd found, the same chilling message that had haunted her since the beginning of this ordeal. With her pulse racing, she yanked open the door, but the hallway was empty, stretching out in eerie silence. She felt a deep, overwhelming dread settle over her, a realization that whoever was doing this was closer than she'd ever imagined. Confrontation with Mark Anna could no longer deny it. Someone was intentionally manipulating her life, piecing together fragments of her past to twist her present. The haunting presence had grown unbearable. Every shadow felt sinister, every small noise a threat, and the isolation of her apartment, once comforting, now felt like a cage. In desperation, she decided it was time to confront Mark. If anyone could help her unravel this mystery, it would be him. She arranged to meet him at a quiet cafe near his new apartment. The cafe was nearly empty, with only the hum of a distant conversation and the sound of cups clinking. Mark arrived a few minutes later, and they sat across from each other in tense silence. She could see the surprise and worry in his eyes, but also a guardedness she hadn't noticed before. Voice tense, almost actoric. Mark, I need you to be honest with me. Do you know anything about someone following me? Following you? Anna, I don't know what you're talking about. Why would anyone follow you? I don't know, but it's like someone knows things about me, things no one else would know. And it all started when we separated. She looks at him, searching for any hint of deception. I need you to tell me the truth, Mark. Are you involved in any of this? Anna, you know me. I would never. I'm not playing games with you. I haven't been watching you or meddling with your life. He sighs, rubbing his temples. Maybe someone from your past is resurfacing? Or could it be in your mind? Her frustration rising. I know what I've seen, Mark, and I know what I've felt. Someone is watching me, and they know things they shouldn't. Mark's face softened, and he reached across the table, but she pulled her hand back, unsure if she could trust him. The pain in his eyes was genuine, but the doubt within her kept her guard up. Mark. Anna, I want to help you. Let's figure this out together. As they talked, the fog in Anna's mind began to lift, and she remembered a name from years ago. Someone she'd once been close to, but had cut ties with. It was a name she'd shared with Mark in a moment of vulnerability, but she hadn't thought about this person in years. Suddenly, it all started to make sense. The letters, the reminders of her past, the unsettling sense of familiarity she felt that night in the coffee shop. As they parted, Anna couldn't shake the thought that her old acquaintance, a person she had long forgotten, might be at the center of this. The memory of the man she'd seen that rainy night returned with disturbing clarity. She finally understood why he looked familiar. He was connected to her past in ways that made her uncomfortable. Someone who had once known her deeply, but whom she'd left behind, choosing a life with Mark instead. Determined to get answers, she went home and spent the rest of the night digging through old letters and messages, hoping to find some clue, some link that would confirm her suspicions. Hours passed, and finally, in the back of her closet, she found an old photo album. Inside was a photo that sent a chill down her spine. It was him, the man she'd seen at the coffee shop. He was standing beside her in the picture, an arm around her shoulder, his eyes filled with a strange intensity that she hadn't noticed before. Her mind raced. How had he come back into her life? And why was he trying to scare her? Was he trying to manipulate her, to draw her away from Mark, as he had tried so many years ago? Just as she was processing this disturbing realization, her phone buzzed with an unknown number. Her heart pounded as she opened the message, her fingers trembling. It read, "Secrets never disappear, Anna. You should know that by now. We have unfinished business." She felt a wave of nausea. This was confirmation. He was here, in her life again, dragging up her past and using it against her. She could no longer deny that her witness was real, and he wanted something from her. But what? Revenge? Reconciliation? She had no idea. Determined to face him and put an end to the nightmare, Anna replied to the message. Anna's message. "What do you want from me?" The response was almost immediate. "Meet me where we first met. You remember the place." It took her a moment to remember, but then it hit her. An old art gallery where they'd first crossed paths, a place she hadn't visited in years. She realized with a sinking feeling that this confrontation would mean digging into parts of her life she'd buried long ago. She spent the rest of the night wrestling with herself, wondering if she should go through with it. Part of her wanted to run, to ignore him, and hope he'd fade back into her past. But she knew it was too late for that. He had already taken over her present, and if she didn't confront him now, she would never regain control over her life. The sun was setting as Anna arrived at the old art gallery. Shadows stretched across the cobblestone walkway leading to the entrance, adding to the eerie sense of déjà vu. She paused outside, steeling herself for whatever lay inside. The gallery looked almost unchanged from when she'd last been here, years ago. It was a place she had once loved, but now it felt like a trap. As she entered, the quiet of the space was stifling. Paintings adorned the walls, but she barely noticed them. Her mind was fixed on the task at hand. She walked through the gallery, her footsteps echoing until she reached the back room, where her witness had asked her to meet. The door was slightly ajar, and a chill ran down her spine as she pushed it open. There, in the dim light, stood the man from her past, his face familiar yet strange, a blend of old memories and current fears. He turned to her, a slow smile spreading across his face, as though he had been waiting for this moment. Her voice firm, but, "What are you doing here? What do you want from me?" His smile widens, a mix of mockery and satisfaction. "Isn't it obvious, Anna? I want you to remember. I want you to face the part of yourself you've buried, the part that chose me once." Taking a shaky breath, but holding his gaze. "That was a long time ago. I moved on. You need to do the same." "Oh, but I never forgot. And neither did you, did you? Even when you chose him, you couldn't erase me completely." He stepped closer, his voice lowering to a whisper. "I know things about you, Anna. Things you haven't even told Mark. I've watched you struggle, watched you doubt him, doubt yourself. All I had to do was plant a few reminders, and your mind did the rest." The weight of his words settled heavily on her. It was true. He had orchestrated everything, carefully nudging her fears, her insecurities, until she began to unravel. But as he spoke, A calm washed over her. This time, she wasn't the same person who had once been entangled with him. She had changed, and she would not let him control her anymore. Her voice steady, filled with determination. I don't know what you hope to gain from this, but I'm not the same person you knew back then. I'm not afraid of my past, and I'm done letting it control me. Witness, his smile falters. Oh, so sure of yourself now, are you? I know your weaknesses, Anna. I know you're still afraid. Maybe I am, but I'm not afraid of you. She takes a step forward, her eyes locked on his. You don't get to hold over me. Whatever we had, whatever you think you know, it's over. You have no power over me anymore. For a moment, silence filled the room. He looked at her, studying her, as if searching for a crack in her resolve. But she stood firm, her eyes unwavering. The power he once held over her had crumbled, leaving him as nothing more than a shadow of her past. He took a step back, defeated. In that instant, she knew it was over. The weight that had been pressing on her for weeks lifted, replaced by a sense of freedom she hadn't felt in years. She turned, ready to leave the gallery and the ghost of her past behind. As she walked away, she heard him call after her, his voice bitter and desperate. Witness, you can't just walk away, Anna. You'll regret this. You'll never be free of me. Leaning back, calm and resolute, I already am. And with that, she left, the echo of her footsteps fading into the silence of the gallery.